I'm recording my homily for the fifth Sunday in Easter 2019. So, a couple things I wanted to bring into the homily today, and it has to do with our ability to develop and to create something that we know is necessary in our lives, and it's the ability to be truly connected with each other, to feel like we're supported, to feel connected, right? And I don't just mean it in a secular sense or just in an earthly sense, but ultimately with Jesus Christ as the center of that connectedness, right? So I'm starting to talk about the annual Catholic Appeal, and so this is our financial support that goes to the Archdiocese of Seattle, which is the wider church, if you will, that we belong to. Sometimes we feel like we become connected on a local level, but we forget that we're part of something bigger, right? And so this is, I think, one of the things I'm trying to promote in this is that we are part of something bigger. In fact, we're necessarily part of something bigger. Because if we're just a parish, if we're just out on our own, or if you're just your family and you separate yourself from the parish, or the parish separates itself from the wider church, or doesn't see it as part of something bigger, then we become disconnected, right? We begin to lose a strength that we are meant to have. Now, this has been a tough year for the Catholic Church. We're continuing to go through and deal with corruption that has riddled our church in terms of bishops not doing what they should do and priests not doing what they should do. And so lay people have had their trust rattled by that, if not destroyed in some cases. And so how to make sure that we have a sense of connectedness when we do feel disconnected? How do we create connectedness and feel disconnected, right? Okay. So we're going to go through a little bit of that. Now, when I was a kid, growing up, I had 3 older brothers and 2 younger sisters, okay? So there were 6 of us. Now, my 3 older brothers all had allergies or hay fever to grass, right? It was just kind of funny. I didn't really mean to be doing this, but I'm standing in the midst of grass. So actually, by the way, I'm actually down here on the waterfront of Marysville, which is very undeveloped. It's something that is just there. If anything, is the industrial buildings took over the waterfront areas, and so they're starting to try to reclaim them. So they built a little path here. So I'm taking advantage of it. Anyway, and so behind me is Interstate 5 and the swamp, whatever you call it, the slough. I don't know what the name of this is, but this is the water comes in and out with the tide all the way up here into Marysville. Okay, sorry. So growing up, my 3 older brothers had allergies to grass, and so because of that, they could never mow the lawn. I always thought that was quite convenient on their part, and so because I did not have allergies, I was the one who was always mowing the lawn. Now, I did enjoy the fact that I got paid to do it, so I enjoyed that, but I was always a little resentful that my brothers had allergies. And I think in my more cruel moments, I would question whether or not those allergies were actually real, right? Or it was just in their head. Now, my 2 younger sisters did not have allergies in that way, in the same way, but they had asthma and they had an allergy to cats. Now, one of my sisters was hyperallergenic to cats. She could walk into a room, and I kid you not, she could stop and she would say, "A cat has been here." I mean, she would know just she was so allergenic to cats, she could tell you immediately. And then she would tell you, this was funny, but she would tell you, she said, "A cat has been here, and it's been here within the last 6 months." I mean, she was like a walking radar for cat dander. Anyways, when I was younger, and again, more cruel at times, I would question their asthma, whether it was real or just in their head, or they were, why didn't they just toughen up? Because I didn't really believe it, because I didn't struggle with it. And I was kind of that way until one of my sisters ended up going to the hospital because her asthma was so bad. And then I realized, okay, All right, it's not just in the head. Now, even though I did not struggle with these things growing up, I struggled with something that I never could put a name on. Nobody ever told me what it was. And I think even if I did have a name on it, I think other people would have said the same thing about me. And that's anxiety. I've always been one who struggled with it. And as I look back as a kid, just how I processed things, there was a lot of fear. And anxiety is different than fear, and anxiety is internal. It is in the head. So if somebody came up and said, oh, anxiety is just all in your head, I said, you know what, actually, factually, you are correct. It is. But it is real. A person becomes wounded in some manner in how they process things, and it turns into this anxiety. So I've been reading a book on it, and I carry this book around with me everywhere, and I just kind of thumb through it every once in a while and just slowly try to grasp and to deal with this thing that I've struggled with most of my life. And there's times, my mom, who I don't think she completely understands just how hard it is sometimes with it, she would say, well, why don't you just trust God, right? So stop being anxious, just trust God. It's like, you're right, Mom, thank you for that. I'll try to do that. But it's a little bit deeper than that. It's a little bit harder than that. So I bring this up because in this book on anxiety, I've had a lot of people ask me about the book on anxiety. I bought a bunch of copies and I've been handing them out because a lot of people struggle today with stress and anxiety. So it's called Unworried, and it's a book by Dr. Gregory, and I always get the name backwards, or Popcak, Popcak. So, okay, there it is if you'd like to order it. There's a place in the book where he says that as human beings, we actually are designed to react to events in a negative way. We're actually designed to be in some ways cautious and to react on some level with that caution. Now, he says, there's one thing that will change that and will immediately turn that event or that occasion into something positive. And that's if that occasion, that circumstance, creates connectedness and support. If we feel connected and supported, whatever that event is becomes positive. Now, I just read this last week, so I'm taking time to process it, but it's very interesting how that seems to make a lot of things make sense when you think about it. They say a person, when they walk into a church for the first time, they will know whether or not they're going to be part of that community within the first 5 minutes. Within the first 5 minutes. Now, what could explain that? They feel connected and supported. Because if we don't, we interpret it in a negative way. It's like, no, this is not for me. It's not for me. Okay. So I bring that up, just talking about the importance of being connected and being supported. Now, I want to give a couple examples of this being in communion, right? We use that word when we talk about the Eucharist, but what we're describing is with the Eucharist, we are in communion. We are connected. That's why somebody cannot receive the Eucharist when they're not in communion. They say, I am not Catholic. Okay, they're not in communion with us. They're not connected to us. They don't support us. And so we want that. We want that connection first. If a person is living a life of in some particular sin, they have become disconnected, and so we want them to be connected with us. So you go to confession and you reject the sin, you reject the connection with the sin, so they can become reconnected with us as a community, right? Okay, so I want to give a couple examples. Now, one is fictional, and the other is non-fictional. So the first is fictional. So you've ever heard the story of The Hobbit? The Hobbit was a book written by J.R.R. Tolkien, a very famous Catholic author who lived a number of years ago. I have never read the book. I was not much of a reader growing up. This is where my brothers were much better than I was. While I was out mowing the lawn, they were inside reading books. So anyways, I didn't mean to say that way, but Where was I going with that? Yes. So I did watch the movies. So they made The Hobbit into 3 movies not that long ago. Now, part of the story of The Hobbit is about this dragon, this great, big, menacing, horrible, fire-breathing dragon. And this dragon, at several points, attacks this one particular town, right? Now, there's a gentleman in the town whose name is Bard. Now, Bard has a family history. His forefathers had the responsibility of killing this dragon. So in the middle of town, they built this great big tower, and at the top of the tower, they put this contraption, which looks like a giant crossbow. It's like a bow and arrow kind of thing. But it's designed to shoot these special arrows that could kill this dragon, these great big 6-foot arrows, right? Now, Bard's forefathers failed. They failed in this endeavor. They never did kill the dragon. And so the dragon had destroyed the town completely. And as the years went on, as the survivors, struggled on in this town, they would remind Bard of the failure of his fathers to kill this dragon. And so anytime he would suggest something, they would say, remember, your family is the one that failed. Right? And we've all suffered because of it. Now, let me ask you this. If you were that gentleman, would you feel connected? Right? If people constantly reminded you of the failure of your family to do something that they should have done or could have done, you're not going to feel very connected, are you? Right. Okay. So, anyways, the dragon comes back, right? And there's Bard. Now, he decides he's going to try and do something about it. While everybody's panicking, everybody's running and fleeing and thinking of themselves. The leaders of the people are collecting their gold and trying to escape. Well, Bard decides to try to do something. So he goes up into this tower, and he doesn't have any of these big special arrows, so he's shooting his own arrows. And in the midst of that, he's realizing it's just useless. He's shooting these arrows at this dragon, and they're just bouncing off, right? So there's this one moment in which his son is about, 13, 14 years old, right? So his son is 13, 14 years old. His son comes up into the tower. Now, he told his son to flee. He told his son with his daughter to get out, but his son comes back because he has one arrow. He has one of these special arrows that's designed in order to kill this dragon. So he takes the arrow from his son, right? Now the problem is, in this place, he does not have the big machine. He does not have what he needs in order to shoot this arrow. So he has to figure something out. So he kind of cobbles together something. So he takes the arrow, but the problem is he still doesn't have something to rest the arrow on. So he has his son stand right in front of him. And he places this great big dragon killing arrow on his shoulder. Now the dragon at this point is circling and destroying the town. The town's just ablaze. But the dragon begins to turn his attention, and he sees this man with his son in this tower. And he begins to taunt the man, right? He's going to kill his son. Dragons talk, all right. So the man takes the arrow, he places it on the shoulder of his son. Now his son is facing him. But as the dragon is circling around and talking and taunting him, the son begins to want to turn and look at the dragon. But as he does that, his father can't aim the arrow. So the father tells the son, he says, don't look at him, just look at me. Just look straight at me. Just look at me. Just trust me. And so then he begins to aim this arrow. And he tells his son, he says, just move slightly to the left or slightly to the right and just hold still. But just look at me. And as the dragon begins to come down, and he's flying straight down the center of town, and he has this arrow aimed right at him, right? With it sitting on the shoulder of his son. I thought this was just a powerful scene, because that's like us and our Heavenly Father, right? Aren't there sometimes we do to our Heavenly Father what that town did to that man, right? We blame him for the dragons in our life, for the things in our life that are destroying and causing us problems. And who do we sometimes blame? We blame our Heavenly Father for it. We blame him for not killing the dragons in our lives. Or there's times when we decide to take it into our own hands and we shoot these arrows at our dragons and they just bounce off. And it doesn't work. I can really relate to that with anxiety, right? Not that that's necessarily the biggest problem in my life, but I can relate to that. And so sometimes we blame our Heavenly Father. So what does our Heavenly Father do? Does he run? Does he give up on us? No, he's right up there in the tower. But you know what he's saying to us? He's saying, look at me. Don't look at the dragon. Look at me. And let me aim that arrow for you. And he places the arrow right on our shoulder. This is a beautiful example of how, when we're in church and we have Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament there, what does Jesus say to us? He says, just look at me. Just look at me. Now, he's not trying to help us escape from our reality. He's not helping us to turn away from the problems in our life. But he's giving us a way to focus. We turn and we look at Jesus. Every day we need Jesus time. Every day we need time where he just says, just look at me. We might have that great big dragon swirling around us, taunting us. He just says, just look at me. Pray with your spouse, right? You pray with your kids. You have that quiet time. While you're driving to work, you have that quiet time. You pray the rosary. You go into the church when you pass by church and you slip in, right? We give the code out to the door so people can come into our church anytime. Just sit with Jesus. Just look at him. Don't worry about the dragons, right? Because Jesus is aiming that arrow. He will be the one to do that. And he will use you to be part of that. Now, if you want to know what happens in the story of The Hobbit, you can rent the movie. You can read the book. Okay, I won't give it away for you. But I think it's a powerful example of connectedness. So you think of that moment when the son is looking at the father, right? Do you think they were connected in that moment? Absolutely. They were so connected in that moment. Another little story. This one's actually real. This one's nonfiction, right? So I was reading a story actually in the Magnificat, the little daily missal, the other day, and the story about a very obscure saint from Ireland. Obviously not St. Patrick, right? But another saint from Ireland. This was a young man who, during his life, he was not very connected to the church. He lived his faith in a kind of lukewarm way, right? Kind of just jumped through the hoops. Well, he has this vision. Okay, this is not a dream. He has this vision where he sees with his own eyes. He sees, now this is obviously a miracle, right? He sees this great big battle that's happening. And you have this giant army of angels, these good angels, and they're fighting in this really, really intense battle with this great big army of these bad angels, these angels that had turned away from God, right? But there's this moment in this great big battle that the good angels turn to this young man and they look squarely at him and they say, this entire battle is just for your soul. We are all fighting just for your soul. Well, this transforms his life. Now, do you think he felt connected in that? Absolutely. Do you think he felt the burden now of entering more fully into the battle for his own soul, as well as every single battle that happens for every soul? Absolutely. And so hence he became a very holy man, and eventually a saint that we look up to, right? In our parishes, our families, Jesus Christ there is at the center. We look upon our Heavenly Father and we allow Him to work in our lives, right? And all those dragons, we turn to our Heavenly Father, we turn to His Son. We allow them to be the ones to guide us in that. In the reading from St. Paul, or Acts of the Apostles, you have St. Paul who's going as a missionary from town to town. And when he goes into the town, what does he do? But he teaches, he gives the gospel, he shares what he has been given. And then he calls upon them to have the responsibility now to live it and to continue it and to be faithful and to take leadership. To take the leadership that's necessary in order for it to continue. One of the frustrations in big parishes is you can have a small group of people doing everything, and then everybody else loses that ability to take on that leadership. Right? This is one of the reasons, I know I'm a broken record on this, I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat myself, but this is one of the reasons why we changed our faith formation system so that kids don't come into a classroom and have one person teach them, but have their parents teach them in the home, because then the leadership, the responsibility is then shared by so many more people. And it's so awesome when we see our parents doing that and taking that on. It's so beautiful. And we see the fruits of it, right? So St. Paul goes into town. He tells them, here's the gospel. People get excited. And he says, now you must accept the responsibility. You must accept the responsibility of transmitting that, sharing it, living it, being connected, right? There's no room here for lukewarmness, or I'm just going to jump through the hoops. There's no room for it. We support each other. We are connected in that, right? All right. Just a couple themes. Staying focused, allowing God to be the center. From that, draws us in and keeps us connected. All right. God bless you, and I'll see you next week.